All right, so today let's talk about the difference between amps and amp modelers. What's the pros and cons, and what's the benefits of using either? This is a huge topic in the church world, playing music at church. What's the benefit of using either one, and which one should I use? So today, let's just take a quick listen through using the amps, and then we'll take a quick listen using the pedals, and we'll see what the difference is. Now let's take a quick listen, playing the same thing back in the amp pedals and see what the difference is. Here's an example of playing something that's a little bit more ambient through the amps. Now here's a little bit of playing some of the ambient stuff through the amp modelers. So now that you've heard the difference between the two, let's talk about pros and cons to both. One pro of using the amp modelers is the size and versatility of them. On most modelers, you can save presets, you can dial in your tones and save them for different guitars that you're using, and they're a lot smaller and a lot more affordable than amps. This is also really convenient if you're connecting with your front of house guy and can really set in a consistent tone that will work for your weekend services. It also reduces a lot of stage volume, and you're able to carry it around with you wherever you go. So one of the pros of using actual amps is just the warmth, feel, and character that it can give. A lot of modelers haven't quite been able to capture the way that air is being pushed through the amp or the feel that it can give when you're playing. Just the warmth and kind of tube saturation that you can get from the amps is really hard to replicate. And there's some really great modelers out there that have done some really awesome work to make a really convenient and consistent sound. But one of the best pros of using amps is really just the fullness of sound that you can get from using them. So now let's talk about some of the cons of amps and amp modelers. For amps, one of the cons is having to maintain them, spend money buying tubes, getting them repaired, which not always are there people around you that work on amps or can repair them for you. So they have to be maintained, and you have some consistent work that you have to do to keep up with them. One of the cons of modelers is that, again, it can't quite capture the feeling that amps can give you. Some other cons to using amps can be the level of sound and the size of the amps themselves. They can be really big and a lot to carry around if you're going to church week to week. If you're lugging those back and forth, your sound is going to change based on mic placement, all these different things, tubes getting old, and so that's going to change a lot. Also, they can be pretty heavy, so it's a lot to carry around with you, whereas a modeler you could throw in your backpack. They could be really loud on stage, and also, if you're at a smaller church, you may not have another room to throw the amps in. So it can be really distracting or overwhelming in a mix if you have amps on stage that are too loud. So some cons with the amp modelers are, one, they have a lot different breakup than amps. So you could tell in the video earlier when I was playing, with the modelers, especially when using a lot of wet effects, like a lot of verb or delay, there's a lot of buildup that happens, and the breakup is way sooner, even when you're playing technically clean without a lot of overdrive. You had way more headroom with the real amps, and it was a lot clearer with those. Another con with some of the amp modelers is some are pretty simple and just have a few knobs that you could twist and turn to set just like an amp. But a lot of them have a user interface that can be pretty confusing and goes really in depth, and it can be really intimidating to some people who are using them. So ultimately, the preference is up to you for what style of music you're trying to play. But overall, I would prefer to use amps, but if I have to use modelers, there's a lot of ways to get really great sounding tones out of them still.